You're watching BreakThru News.
I'm Charlotte Thun-Hohenstein, and you're watching BreakThru News on BTR Today. On today's show, we're talking about the work of transforming urban spaces for the public good, and in particular, New York City's High Line. Joining me to discuss this is Robert Hammond. Hi, Robert, who's the co-founder of the High Line and former executive director of Friends of the High Line, which is the non-profit conservancy that manages it. So this fall, the third and final section of the High Line will open to the public. For those of you who don't know, the High Line was originally an old railway road running along the west side of Manhattan, stopped operating in 1980, and was basically, in all likelihood, going to be torn down before Robert and another gentleman, Josh David, stepped in and over the course of a decade managed to save it. So it's an incredible story in itself, all the more so because really, Robert, it seems like you and Josh this was not like a burning passion of yours by any means. You just recognized that no one else was going to step up to the plate, and then you just didn't give up.
Yeah,
really.
we both of us had other careers. We didn't have any experience in urban planning or architecture. So in the beginning, it was just sort of this crazy idea both of us had, but we both shared and thought, maybe we'll give it a try.
And it turned out to be really probably one of the most treasured landmarks, certainly of the neighborhood and of New York City. I mean, I know so many people who, visitors and locals alike, who go there regularly.
Yeah, it's been very moving. I mean, it's been so much more successful than I think we ever could have imagined when we started it.
Well, so that's actually the first question that I wanted to ask you, which was because the story, and there's a book out which I will display in a moment, but the story is one of just improvisation the whole way through. And so I was wondering whether you think it would have actually turned out so well if you had had a more specific vision, because it seems like one of the strengths is just constantly folding in more perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons we wrote that book, is to sort of, people think that we had this grand plan that we were following step by step, or that Josh and I were these geniuses that came up with all this idea. And it was interesting writing the book, we realized every idea that actually worked out, someone else gave us. And we just, what we did was we took a lot of good ideas that other people gave us to make it happen. But yeah, I don't think, one of I see a lot of projects now, people starting, and one of the keys is that flexibility and that openness to ideas and changing the ideas. I mean, one of the advantages was Josh and I weren't architects. We weren't designers. We didn't have a specific vision to do. Our idea was, let's save it from demolition, which it was threatened at the time, and let's see what the city wants to do with it. Let's the collective, the community, sort of come up with a vision of what it should be.
Well, let's talk a bit about the High Line, because it is a very special park, and the railroad is actually, it's suspended above ground level, so people have called it the park in the sky. Other than the fact that it is suspended in the air, what else distinguishes it in your mind from New York's parks?
Well, I think the traditional model of parks was created with Central Park, and a lot of Central Park, it was meant to be an escape from the city, which it was meant to be sort of a piece of the countryside almost brought within the city. And the High Line's not meant to be an escape from the city. It's not an escape from the city. You can see the taxis, you can see the buildings right next to it, and that's what I think makes it successful, is it feels different. You have the greenery, you have the nature, but yet the nature is woven into the city, running for a mile and a half, and you can't disconnect the city from the High Line, from the nature, from the city. And so it's that juxtaposition that I think makes it really powerful.
And that wilderness is such a crucial element of it. At the same time, even though it's not it's such an interesting combination, because as you say, it's not getting away from the city, and yet it seems like preserving a sense of wilderness was absolutely crucial to it. So how did you guys do that beyond obviously very careful planting? But it sounds like you actually went to extra lengths to create a sense of wilderness.
Yeah, it's what I think people aren't aware of is how much nature changes the way we experience anything, and in this case, the city. And I think so much of the city is about moving quickly, walking quickly, hurrying, and what the High Line does is it slows you down. And that's what I think nature does. It just is this natural sort of respite. But you're still within the city. So it creates this, I think, like tension of being part of the city, but being part of the nature. But we had an amazing design team led by James Corner, field operations with Dilish Renfro and Pete Uldoff. And the planting, when we started it, we didn't know what it was going to be, what we were going to build up there. And then gradually over time, what people fell in love with was Joel Sternfeld had taken some photos of what it looked like up there in this wild state.
And you went up there as well.
Yeah,
you experienced that.
Yeah, when I first went up there, it was almost 15 years ago. It was the summer of 1999. And I'd always loved the structure from the street, this steel industrial relic. But then when we went up there, it was 1.5 miles of wildflowers running right through the middle of Manhattan. And we knew people didn't get that part of it. And so Joel Sternfeld took these photos, and that's what people fell in love with. People fell in love with this wild landscape that was growing right in the middle of their city. And so that's what gradually over time, this consensus grew that this is what they wanted. They wanted to preserve some of that feeling. But we couldn't just leave it as is. We had to actually remove everything that was there to remediate it.
Quite a scary step.
Yeah.
I would imagine.
Yes, the very thing that we had fallen in love with, we had to remove. So that's where the design team was so great, and they came up with a design that, recreate, but also just create something new, but it's inspired by that wild landscape.
You guys actually, if I'm correct, you took seeds from all the existing plants.
Probably about 1/4 of the plants growing up there were growing up there. But, I asked Pete Uldoff, the horticulturist, one time, should I be calling this a natural landscape? And he said, actually, there's nothing natural about it. It's idealized landscape. And it actually takes a lot of work to make it look that wild. The gardeners on the High Line do an incredible job to keep it looking completely natural and wild, but it takes a lot of work to make it look like that.
Wow. What about the sense of history? I, for one, was shocked to discover that it only opened to the public, or the first section, in 2009.
Yeah.
Because since I moved to the city, it honestly feels like it's been there for forever. I mean, and the railway itself actually dates back to 1929, and then that corridor actually dates back to the mid 1800s. So there is a sense of you do get that sense of history.
But even the old structure is not that old. 1929 is not that long. My dad's not that much older than the High Line. So it's interesting. People think of it as this ancient relic, but it's not even 100 years old. And the last train was still riding in 1980. So, but it is the history of it that really, one of the things that captured, I think, a lot of us was, that the trains used to run down on 10th Avenue, and it was called Death Avenue because so many people were run over by the trains. And, it was that sense of this history and going back to the industrial history of the city and the neighborhood. That's why we put the train tracks back in the plantings. You can see them peeking out, and in some cases in the walkway. Because now my favorite is actually seeing kids up there and the kids discovering. They don't actually know it's a railroad.
Really cool.
And then they see the rails, and then they realize trains are running right where they were standing, running right through where the trees are now. And you just see kids light up with the idea that, because I think so many kids, I know I love trains. And so the idea that there was trains. And that there was a train running through the city and through this park not that long ago. I mean, one of my favorite photos is this picture of, this giant locomotive right in the middle of the city with the Empire State Building in the background.
Incredible. We're gonna take a break in a second. This is maybe a tough question. Is there anything, and you don't have to answer it because it's kind of mean, but is there anything about the old High Line that you miss?
It was one of my big fears is when we opened it, is because it was for 10 years. We started in 1999. It opened in 2009. When I would get to go up there, I was almost by myself or with a few other people. So it felt like, my private space, and I got to experience it with no one up there. And so I was sort of worried what it would be like, with other people. But in some ways it got better. And I know now one of our biggest problems is it's so successful. We have so many crowds. But in some ways, and some people, New Yorkers love to complain about crowds or tourists. But now there's a whole different aspect of it. Is experiencing the people is one of my favorite things. It's like, what is people watching and how people experience. And generally you look and people are happier, a little bit happier on the High Line, I think. You see people holding hands, you see people smiling, you people see people on dates, you see older couples, you see
people
kids.
Don't hold hands in New York, so that's a thing. Like, wow.
So, I mean, that's one of the things that wasn't up there. You know, it was just this solitary experience. And now it's about, to me, the interaction with people. It's one of the things that makes it special.
Wow, awesome. Well, we are going to take a break. We'll be right back in a moment after this quick excerpt from the latest episode of Live Studio featuring Unicycle Loves You.
All around you. Amy, it's not too late. I was like in. Why you hide when you cry?
We're back with our discussion of transforming urban spaces and the High Line. Robert, what in general is so particularly special about having parks in general in the city? Because obviously, especially in New York, nature is, you know, a sort of rare commodity for the most part. But you were mentioning this sort of social element, this diversity and people watching. Can you elaborate on that?
I think parks are one of the few places where all different kinds of people come together. And I think that's a really important piece that it provides for the city. There's also a lot of scientific studies that have shown the other kind of benefits from, you know, kids do better in school when they have access to parks. There's less crime. Obviously, the economic benefits, you know, of parks and creating value in cities. You know, it becomes a place that people want to work, live, shop, visit. You know, the High Line has become a huge economic generator, not just for the neighborhood, but for the whole city. It's now a big tourist draw. Over, you know, 50% of our visitors are tourists. This year, the High Line is expecting over 5 million visitors.
Wow. Well, let's just talk about that economic element a bit more, because that's something that also came out in the story, was this sense of constant struggle against property developers, you know, and sort of more conventional real estate development, and people saying from all sides that you know, building this park wasn't going to be economically strong enough. You know, do you think that you need to really push back against those forces more than people think you do?
Yeah, I mean, now it's hard for people to imagine the High Line being unpopular because now it's so popular. But when we started, most people wanted to tear it down. The Mayor Giuliani was in favor of tearing it down. He signed a demolition order a few days before he left office. All the property owners in the neighborhood were against it. One property owner spent over $2 million fighting us in legal fees trying to tear it down. Wow. So the irony is they've benefited a lot, you know, from the High Line. But yeah, I think it's in a really important case when people have kind of park projects. It's not just about creating beautiful green space, but they're economic generators for cities, and this has been proven all over the world.
It just sounds like it's riskier going down that route rather than just putting up tearing it down and putting up a giant, you know, I don't know, mall, or not mall, but, you know, real estate, you know, like that seems like immediately lucrative.
If the High Line wouldn't have been built,
off, it's actually so much.
Yeah, if the High Line hadn't been built, they just wanted to build more buildings in its space. There wouldn't have been no buildings. It would have just been more buildings. But I think
New York has a lot of buildings.
Yeah. And the High Line, you know, it's also, the High Line has sort of sped the development of that neighborhood, probably. I mean, some people, you know, try to blame the High Line for the gentrification of the neighborhood. The neighborhood was definitely changing, but it's definitely sped the changes, you know, that are happening all over the city.
Just in general, would you want to encourage people to try and have locals rather in the neighborhood to get more involved with these kind of projects? Because at least from my perspective, the whole idea of urban design and urban planning for someone outside of that field just seems so alien and remote. Yeah. And you know, and you just sort of feel like there's no way you can actually get involved in anything like that.
Well,
but
no,
this
but, you know,
sort of maybe shows that you can.
Yeah, no, that's one of the things I hope the High Line does, inspire people to get involved in their neighborhood. I think it makes a much better project when it starts from the bottom and goes up. So many urban planning projects start at the top and then they're pushed down, whereas the High Line started with Josh and I, who lived in the neighborhood, and then we got the community involved, and eventually the Bloomberg administration was a huge partner with us, but it really started was a bottom-up project, and you see that happening all over the city. Some projects that are even similar to the High Line. There's the Queensway. There's the Low Line on the Lower East Side. And what I love about these projects, they're not trying to be like the High Line in a different neighborhood. They each have their own character. They're reflecting the community that they're coming out of. And to me, that's when people say, oh, we just want to build a High Line in our neighborhood, in our city. I know it's not going to work. It's just, and it's not that interesting. The projects that are ultimately successful are the ones that create have their own identity rooted in their own neighborhood.
So, and you mentioned earlier that you did not before this have any background in urban development. As you were going through this process, were there other projects that you found yourself looking to for inspiration? I know the Paris Promenade Plantée has a very sort of similar idea in that they're transforming, they transformed a railroad, but you guys decided you didn't quite want to imitate that, you know, like what you're saying.
Yeah, no, I mean, when we started this, we quickly found out about the Promenade Plantée. It's an old elevated rail line they turned into a park about 10 years before the High Line, and it was great that it just worked. It wasn't a design inspiration. I mean, I think Central Park, although, again, we didn't want to build a Central Park on the High Line, but one of the models was that it was Central Park was rescued in the 70s by a private group, the Central Park Conservancy, started by Betsy Barlow Rogers, and that was an inspiration that citizens can get involved and help help create or turn around and then run, because that's one of the things I think most people don't understand is the High Line. Although it's a New York City public park, it's privately managed and does not get any city funding. The entire budget is, so every employee you see up there, every maintenance worker, gardener, is all paid for by Friends of the High Line and paid by members who, voluntarily contribute to the High Line.
So we're gonna end in a second. One more question. Right now, are there any projects? I know you mentioned Queensway. Are there any other projects in New York City that you're particularly excited about in terms of transforming spaces or further afield?
I think the Low Line's another interesting example, because that's really a technology play, activating a underground trolley terminal on the Lower East Side into a park using photo optics, lighting it with natural sunlight from above.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Robert, for joining me today. I encourage everyone to check out the High Line. It is absolutely lovely. And also check out the book, which I have right here. The High Line, the inside story of New York City's Park in the Sky. Compelling story. We will be right back in a moment after a quick excerpt from our most recent edition to Serious Business on BTR TV featuring Mannequin Pussy. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm Charlotte Thun-Hohenstein and this is BreakThru News, your window into today. Be sure to check out breakthrough.radio.com through the weekend for our continued Photo Week coverage to find our list of the best Twitter accounts for finding mind-blowing pictures of outer space. That's it for what's breaking through the news today. Tell us what's breaking through your world on Twitter @BreakThru Radio. I'm Charlotte Thun-Hohenstein and thank you for joining us.